Do you ever feel that you've lost yourself in the busyness and anxiety and even traumas of our lives? Well, with us tonight is someone who's going to help you reclaim yourself, find that truth, and step forward with more power and courage than ever before. Her name is Ann Fancy. She is a yoga teacher. She is a spiritual retreat leader, and she's host of the podcast Becoming Lit AF, which are her initials. Love that. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. This is Boss Up Goddess, where I, Elizabeth Ann Atkins, interview trailblazing women like Ann Fancy, who help us all live bigger, better, and bolder. I absolutely love Ann. I met her in Lori Lipton's intuitive practitioner certification course, and we clicked, and she's just brilliant in her visions and her talent of helping other people open their minds and hearts to their truth. So, Anne, can you talk a little bit about who you are and how you've become this leader in this wonderful teaching platform you've created?
Sure. Thanks for having me on here. By the way, it's fun to connect again. Um, hmm, let's see, where do we start? Well, I've been teaching yoga for 15 years and practicing since I was 21, and
Wow.
so it'll be 20 years soon. I'm 40, so we're heading. Oh, I got chills. It's been almost 20 years, and what I say about yoga is I mean, what people like to say often is yoga saved me, but I think what yoga has done for me and what it does for a lot of people is that it helps us save ourselves. Um, and I'm very aware in this current environment or state of the world to be careful around even what it is that yoga is, and it's a sensitive, complex thing in the world of cultural appropriation on all of these things. The practice that I met in the Western world, what it did for me was very slowly over time allowed me to integrate my spiritual self with my need for physicality and movement. So I'll just go back even one step further, which
Mhm.
is that I was a highly anxious kid. I grew up with a clinically depressed mother, and I myself, my anxiety showed up as headaches and stomach aches from the time I was very small, like two,
Mm.
three. And now, in retrospect, I can identify that I'm a highly sensitive person. I was naturally intuitive, and I was trying to navigate a world where I could feel everything and I knew a lot. And the grown-ups, for lack of better language, in the world seemed out of order to what I felt inside. And so I think what that did for me is turned my body into this, well, the body is a sensing machine, but my inability as a kid to change that and to change the trajectory then turned into anxiety, depression, sadness, and disconnect. So I had that started very young, and it turned into debilitating separation anxiety by the time I was 11 or 12. And just kept manifesting different ways, depression, body image issues, just all kinds of stuff. Now, that
Mm.
all being said, I mean, you want to take a break and ask me something? Because I'll just keep talking.
No, 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 no. How did that evolve into yoga and you
Yeah,
finding your power and
yeah,
healing from all of that? It's so
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. So clearly I'm used to talking for a living, so I'll just keep going on things without interruption. But so what happened for me is, I was a gymnast as a kid. And so body integration, I was fearless. Like I was definitely like the adventure seeker as far as climbing trees and jumping off of high things. And I was really connected in that way to trusting my body. I taught gymnastics to little kids when I was like 13 when I was 13 and beyond. Um, and so what happened to me is that I was also raised in a pretty Christian home. Before I was born, my parents were in very uh, cult-like churches, Pentecostal. My mom was raised Baptist. My dad was raised by a badass of a human being, Catholic, but ahead of her time, but also devout in lots of ways. And So there was a lot, my dad is very intelligent and a seeker. So there was a lot of that like kind of woven into my childhood. By the time I was old enough to really recognize it, we were in a more liberal church. But even within that, it was like that intuitive space of, for me, that was like, something's not right here. You know, like some of these rules and these things you're telling me, they don't add up. And I, church was all I knew as a spiritual connection. You know, I remember my
Yeah.
mom told me I was like, when I was 3 years old, I'd be in the grocery cart singing "This Little Light of Mine," and I always think
Oh.
that's really, isn't that interesting, right? Like,
Yes.
I'm gonna let it shine. You know, like that
Yes.
song I chose still speaks to my soul.
Uh-huh.
But I had to like break up with the church. I was president of my church youth group. So that
Mm.
was what I knew for spirituality. I knew it didn't fit, but I didn't know anything else. I become a young adult. I identify as on the LGBTQ spectrum. I'm married now with a wife and a daughter. Um, and I devoured all kinds of books, Conversations with God, and Sylvia Brown. I started kind of seeking in these different places. Anyway, so I was trying to keep the spirituality alive, but I didn't know how to like leap, away from what I was raised with and raised
Mhm.
in. And so um I played rugby right after that, right in college, while I was in college studying my undergrad in psychology. And I really messed up my shoulders. They were destroyed through rugby because
Oh.
I was hooker. You have your arms up around these, larger women. I was a little one in the middle of the scrum.
Oh.
And yeah, and hypermobile. Let me tell you though, I loved rugby. I don't want to, let me say that. That
Uh-huh.
was some real fun. But my shoulders were jacked up. I was missing my tribe, my people, a spiritual connection. I was nannying. I was 21 years old, and the family I nannied for were avid yogis at Center for Yoga, which
Oh,
is like,
wow.
yeah. And so they, and Center for Yoga is really where Detroit yoga bloomed. Johnny Kest really blew it up in our area. So we have him to thank. We can have our feelings about that, but we have him to thank for that. So I decided to finally go to a class because I had someone, my perfectionistic self had always desired to try yoga, but to go in by myself at 20 years old was
Uh-huh.
way beyond what I was willing to do.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I went with her, and I remember the first time I that first class. I remember I have like a flashbulb moment, which I think our souls drop in as like guideposts.
Uh-huh.
And I had a flashbulb moment, and I was like, oh, I've chose this whole conversation. That's really fun.
It's
Oh,
awesome.
yeah. I know that this is meant for me. This is like a missing piece.
Uh-huh.
I know this. Like I knew that I knew it. I knew that I would teach it. It was like I literally found sanctuary in a whole new way.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Wait,
and
and take us to that
yeah,
moment. Are you on the yoga mat? Are you doing your
yeah.
first pose? Are you
No, I'm
breathing? Did
like,
you have
I think it was either right in the middle or towards the end that I remember just sort of sitting there on my mat in this like closed. I mean, there's a million people in there. It was hot. It was sweaty. I have no idea what I even just did. I remember just like, I can remember exactly where I was sitting in the class. And um, I just knew it was for me, those kinds of knowings just drop in, like almost what you would say is deja vu, but it was like the imagery and the moment combine into a deep knowing that this was like the next important guidepost for me. And
wow.
my life has been guided by those guideposts, that
Uh-huh.
I'm like, and I can be a train barreling at it once I know it's for me, and I don't tend to trust that it might not be for me in that moment.
Right.
But I had that knowing, like I'd found my way home. And I mean, layer on all of the body image stuff. I'd started disconnecting from my body through anxiety, depression. Eating and not eating became the way that I numbed out and managed my depression and anxiety. So, my weight would go up and down. I tried every diet on the, in the books. I was naturally small, but I'd put on weight just to protect my empathic self, um, and all the disconnections I had made in with my body. And so there's a lot of body loathing still. Like, so, yoga entered, but I had a lot of uh, integration that I still needed to do of being in a healthy relationship with my body. I remember plenty of classes I left because I just felt like I was too fat to show up. Like I was too embarrassed to be there.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Wow. How did you overcome that?
Well, um, this is what I've realized, like all of this is retrospective. What I
Hmm.
realized for me is much of what I've learned, I think, about life. But for me, what yoga did was it was a very gentle and slow way for me to begin to entertain tolerating discomfort in micro doses. So I learned how to be uncomfortable in my body. I learned how to let my legs hurt and be okay. I learned how to be with my thoughts for a second. And I'm talking like 1 second sometimes in a class that I just had that. And I don't know that I knew that it was happening. And so this is where like I always think of the hero's journey. It was like if my light lived and my soul energy or my soul itself lived outside of my body, it was like every class, every time was just a little bit of me being pulled back in.
Hmm.
And so at the time, I had no idea that I was reintegrating or embodying my soul energy more fully. And it took a solid decade really to feel like I was starting to be comfortable in my body in a way that,
Wow.
yeah, that I was really making peace.
Wow.
Also, yeah, it was also the first thing that um that gave me peace with my anxiety and depression too. And so I
Wow.
tried therapy, I tried drugs, which I just never felt good on because it turned me completely numb. And I have much respect for Western medicine and the need for drugs. My mother needs them. They're good for her. They work for her. And I take medications for other things. But for me, antidepressants, anti-anxiety didn't work. And the medication didn't work. Cognitive behavioral therapy gave me a little bit of myself back, but there were lots of bumps along this road too that were really, really difficult. The 20s are hard, but yoga allowed me to start to just build that tolerance and trust within myself. And
I love it. Love it.
yeah, yeah,
Wow. So then did you start learning how to be a teacher, training for that, or did you just diligently go every day to class? What was
it
the
was, it was,
evolution to where you are now?
yeah, it was both. So by 23, I was on the verge of my first ever major breakup. And in teacher training because I had found like my home studio in the same way that I knew yoga was for me. I also knew that studio over time wasn't for me. And I found my way to my friend and teacher, Linda Kay. Her studio was called Yoga Chi. And I happened there randomly. I was nannying for a different family at this point and they had some deal and I walked in and it was the same thing. I like knew, okay, here's the next mark or the next breadcrumb on this path. I feel seen here and validated in a way that I didn't at the other studios I had gone to. And I found my teacher. She was grounded, she was honest, she was real, she cared about alignment, which I knew mattered to me as somebody who'd been in athletics and who has a unstable body, hypermobile body. I needed that structure. Um, and so I loved her and I knew immediately that like, okay, I could study with you. So I took teacher training, I think around 23, but my anxiety HSP stuff, highly sensitive person stuff, manifested into perfectionism. And
Oh,
I had major performance anxiety about getting up and being able to do this. So
wow.
Linda was an expert. She'd been teaching at that time 25, 30 years. And I'm like, how will I ever be that? And so, which, is so funny now. You can look back and go, okay, like, she saw in me what I could not see in me. And so I kicked that teaching ball down the road for at least 2 years, where she was like, come on, get out there and teach. And I was like, no, like, I can't. I just can't.
Wow.
Yep. So,
Wow.
so I started
Was it
teaching to
fear?
kids.
It was,
Yeah,
oh,
fear.
kids.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. So
Uh-huh.
fear was huge. My fear, my, you know, I always say this, it isn't lost on me that someone who suffers from like, is a recovering perfectionist and suffers from hypercriticalness, it was in my environment that I was raised in and all these things. that then I put myself into a career where literally whether or not you like me is how much is like dependent on how much money I can make. So like, and on top of that, I've always been fiercely authentic. So it was this really interesting dance. Like I was never willing to compromise who I am to be liked. So in that, it was almost like there was more discomfort around it, or more challenge with that, because I was like, well, I have to be me, and then I'll just have to see what happens here. But it was really scary to get that going. So I taught kids, found my voice, and I'd always been, not always, but I'd been a leader, in other ways before that. So I had some sense of how to talk to people, and I always worked with kids and groups and ran things. But it's there's something really vulnerable about showing up as a teacher, trying to speak into the world, 25 years old, at that time, by the time I finally did it. But I was just lucky enough to call it in. I worked for this company called Medics, and they were awesome with helping me figure out how to like make the leap from the crap job I had to make it all fit together.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest is, I guess, history. So it's really a beautiful thing. And in the way that yoga started to give me back myself, teaching gave me even more of myself back, you
Oh,
know.
I love it, love it, love it. Perfect. Your story is amazing. It's inspiring. So you did something that you now guide others to do. So, Anne, how can someone who's watching right now, going through things, which a lot of people are going through stuff during the
Hmm.
pandemic, how can they find themselves? How can they reclaim their truth and step into their power?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of doorways. I'll say that. I think the biggest piece of that for me and what I've witnessed and experienced is that you have this barometer built into your body, that you are an intuitive being. We have this sensory system that says yes, no, contract, expand, chills, tears, anger, whatever. And that we've been taught in our culture largely to disembody, to not trust that. As women, specifically, that intuition was considered dangerous, and you know, like all the temptress and all of that creative, sexual, intuitive energy was considered bad. And I think part of what's happening in the world right now is this reclamation of self. And when I say feminine energy too, I mean for men as well. Like men
Mm-hmm.
have access, and I think it's important they're given permission too.
Mm-hmm.
But um, for me, that was a huge piece. I realize now that my barometer, my system of sensing was showing me, and for me, anxiety and depression were me not listening. That was misalignment. And my body saying, no, not this way, not there, not, and as a young person, before adulthood, I didn't have really much chance to really listen to that as much as I wish or I hope to give my own daughter.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
as an adult, we start to, I think of it as a compass, right? Like you have your own inner compass, and your compass is trying to guide you. It's giving you information all the time. And we need
Mm-hmm.
to trust and have faith that you know things, that you're divinely wise, that there is that thing that's nagging you isn't some silly desire or some pipe dream, but that it's actually calling you to your own soulful alignment, your own
Mm-hmm.
inner compass. And the courage that it takes to do that, to follow that, can be done in these like baby steps, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And I think that's the biggest thing. We know, all of us, when we're on path or off path to some degree eventually. And some of us have to get way off path, way in the country back roads to go, oh wait, I'm miserable. This is terrible. Right. And so the reclamation to me is around being willing and courageous enough to trust both your body and your intuitive sensing system, that you actually
Mm-hmm.
know things, you know? And
Wow. So it takes, sorry, and it takes a minute to get there because there's so much noise in our
mhm,
minds, and we're so used to going to the fear or the, all the chatter and doing what other people expect of us or what we should do or say or
yes.
be. So how do you sift down through all of that to
Mhm,
really listen to that voice? Does yoga,
mhm.
meditation, and other practices help amplify that voice?
I mean, for me, it did, right? So yoga taught me to manage discomfort, and the discomfort is often in those moments that are like I'm off path, right? And I actually have tools to manage that. Certainly getting quiet, but even quiet is scary for people. I think it's sometimes found in little things like knowing that having a feeling you should drive a different way home on your path
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
then not listening to it and
Mhm.
finding yourself in traffic, like, and
Yes.
going, "Oh, I did know that." Or not eating something or thinking maybe you shouldn't have that thing and then ending up with terrible heartburn later, right? Like
Yeah.
that, those really silly seeming things of, you know, or thinking that you should pick up the phone and call them. And then the person says, I was just thinking about you and I've got all this going on. It's like in those little moments where you can say yes to the instinct.
Mhm.
Mel Robbins talks about the 5 second rule, and that when you
Mhm.
have an impulse, those impulses are guided by your intuitive center, which actually lives in your heart, right? So the heart actually intuits, this is heart math, before the brain. And that is if we don't respond quickly to just little instincts, little tiny things, mother's instinct, whatever that looks like for you, then the brain starts to go, oh, I think there's a threat here, right? So to me, this
Oh.
is, it's all practice. It's
Mhm.
saying yes to the littlest moments and building up that intuitive muscle. Starting to tune inward, doing any practice that gets you in touch with your body's sensing system, because that there's so much information there for us. And
Mhm.
managing, you know, it might mean starting with therapy at because you realize you're totally disconnected and you need some trauma therapy, or you need somebody teaching you somatic experiencing by Peter Levine. Like there's, like, that's what I mean. There's lots of entry points. Yoga worked for me,
Mhm.
but I don't think it's the only way. It's just go where you're called and
Mm.
tune in any way that you can to
Mhm.
listen to
Mhm.
that. I think people think they can't listen because their should is loud. But if you really, if push comes to shove and you really ask them, if you really listen to them, they'll tell you what they need.
Mhm. I love that so much. And getting quiet and still and listening and trusting is so powerful. I always say there's like an angel here and a devil just proverbially on this side telling you this to do
Mhm.
this and this. But when we really tune into that angel voice, that divine voice within, it never steers us wrong. It's always our truth. It's always right. And it's so comforting to know we have that power.
Yeah,
So,
that's really what it is to me. It's
mhm.
like the posture. I think we talked about this, but the posture of what if I was the hero or heroine in my own journey? What if every obstacle and challenge and hardship and crappy parents and whatever it is that I was handed, what if I can shift my perspective to imagine, even just for a moment or two, that I am the superhero in my own video game, my own novel, my own adventure, and that as I walk through my life, all of those things, those obstacles, those hardships I've walked through, can I look back and go, oh, there was the jewel I earned, I retrieved for myself. And and that not only is it a posture of empowerment, to me, it's also about having this deep faith that you're not the victim of the circumstances, but that you literally intended yourself to rise. And so how can I reclaim that energy, that rising, you know, and move that into the world, be a conduit of that, and trust that I'm worthy to bring it through. You know,
Mhm.
it's not easy work. I don't mean it to sound that way, but I think the posture of
Mhm.
warrior, of badass, like finding
Yes.
any amount of that you can and just trying to walk that into your life, you know?
I love that so much. So, do you do this type of work, and when you lead retreats to help women birth this knowledge and power?
Yeah. I think I do this. I think this is what I do, period. So whether it's on the mat and the way that I speak in a yoga class, my podcast, I've just recently did a workshop with my friend, your friend and my friend, Lori Lipton, about embodiment. And I think that's a lot of what this is that embodiment to me is about reclaiming your soul's vitality your worthiness, your that energy, that power, which we sometimes make bad, but that like innate power, and pull that into my being so that
Mm.
we can only transform this world to the world we want it to be through the action of our bodies, because we embodied as human beings. So instead of spirituality being out there and disconnected and airy fairy, like, how do I pull all of that into action, to activism, to integration? So yes, I do this. It's really about learning to look at yourself through the lens of love and compassion, but also fierce honesty, truthfulness.
Mm. So
So that
how
if
do you
I,
do that with
yeah.
conversations
Mm,
with yourself, journaling? How do you get fiercely honest with yourself?
mm. That's a good question. Um, that's a really good question. How do you get fiercely honest with yourself? Well, I think first thing is naming all the ways we don't, right? So we when we do these workshops and things, and when I talk about it in class, it's looking at your behavioral patterns. What am I doing that pulls me away? How do I numb? What's my particular brew of disconnection? We all have one. It's human to have one. Can I look at that with grace and love? Can I trust that that has served me? Can I trust that I might still need that? Like, I'm not giving up Netflix anytime soon. You don't have to either, or Target, but can I like look at it through the lens of love, and compassion? I mean the kind of love that isn't like, I mean like fierce love, right?
Yeah.
That kind of look at it through that lens and ask myself hard questions like, is this serving me? Do I still need it? For me,
Mhm.
body image obsession, diet, all of that was a way that I didn't have to answer the call of my soul, right? If I could keep my energy
Oh.
depleted and I could stay outside of myself, I didn't have
Oh.
to step in, right? I
Wow.
think that's what
And
it
can you say that
is.
again? That is so powerful.
Yeah, I'll try to say it again. For
Okay.
me, I realized that all of my body image stuff, I mean, I owned every book on diets, all of the ways that I was obsessing about my body kept me out of my body, kept my power out of my body. And by staying focused on those things and making that the carrot I was chasing, I never had to actually answer the call that was in me. I didn't have to pull that power and energy in and walk that in. It was an amazing way to stay disempowered, disconnected,
Mm.
and then without responsibility for really doing what was actually in me to do. Does that make sense?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's my story too. Like you just totally
Yeah.
summarized it. And I know that there's millions of women out there with that story, men too, probably.
Mhm.
But the beauty is we both healed it, released it, and stepped into that power and integrated it all. And now we're teachers to others, which is so awesome.
Yeah. So I think that your power is held in the things that you're giving it away to, right? And that
Mhm.
you just stirred something, and now I lost it because I was trying to listen to you. The outside, this is it, the outside world, right? The when we talk about oppression of people, right? The oppression is because if we are disempowered, we're going to keep the minute people in power, right? So if we're obsessed with our bodies, if we're obsessed with shopping or bank accounts looking right, you know white centric culture, the patriarchy, like all of the places that the small number of people hold power. The reason women were temptresses and made evil and witches were burned is because of the power. The tyrants are always afraid of the power, right? Like that's a Dumbledore Harry Potter quote to show my nerdy side, but like people in power are afraid that the rest of us will realize how powerful we are, both individually and even more so collectively. And
Right.
so to me, the real carrot is knowing the transformative power of the transformative energy and the vitality we regain by choosing to step towards the hard but right next thing, you know.
Ooh, I love that, Anne. Wow, that's so powerful. Is there anything you'd like to anything else you'd like to share with people watching about how to reclaim ourselves and become the heroine in our own journey? Heroine.
Mm, mm. I think it's really about trusting that you can, trusting that you're worth it, trusting that you came here on purpose in this time, in the environment you were born into, in all of that, that you were built for this divine mission, and that it's up to you to both discern it, decide it, and walk into it. And the more of us that are doing that and coming alive to who we are, and coming into that faith and that trust in your
Mhm.
inherent good,
Mhm.
then and your good may be simply as simple as breaking the patterns in your family lineage. And that is
Ooh,
powerful medicine for the world. It doesn't mean we're all going to be
wow.
big, right? Yeah.
Yes. Wow. And where can people listen to your podcast and learn more about you?
My podcast should be on all podcast platforms. You can find me at annfancy.com or on social media. I'm just my name everywhere. My podcast is Becoming Lit AF. You can interpret that any way you like. I like the cruder version. And
I love it.
um, yeah, and lots of good stuff. Sign up for my newsletter, and we've got more workshops and really exciting stuff coming down the line. So
Oh, awesome. Awesome. And you are amazing, inspiring, and thank you for this wonderful insight tonight that I hope is helping lots of people who are watching right now.
thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Let's keep in touch, and I wish you all the best in all that you do.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you. And thank you, all of you, for joining me here on Boss Up Goddess, where you got to meet yoga teacher, podcaster, and spiritual retreat leader Ann Fancy, who helps us all live bigger, better, and bolder by sharing her wisdom with all of us tonight and in her daily life as a wonderful spiritual leader. Thank you very much, Ann Fancy, and thank you, all of you. Please do like, share, subscribe, comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Follow me on Twitter at Elizabeth Atkins. And remember, boss up, goddess. You have the power. I'll see you next time.